Starting off, we get Max taking the kids to a diner somewhere, stating that he was surprised the old place was still open after all these years, given how long it's been since he's been there, and sighs softly as they all sat down to have breakfast there. When Ben questions what was so special about this place, Max goes on to explain, "I met your grandmother here, Ben," to which he seemed to understand now why it was so important that they visited. After breakfast, we see that Max had taken them to a park so they could stretch their legs for a while. We do not get the scene of Ben stealing the kite from Gwen, and as such, no dogs chasing around Wildmutt either. Rather, it's just her practicing spells with Charmcaster while Ben was seen studying up on plumber information. We then get the episode back on track with an alien woman appearing and looking around at everything around them before spotting Ben and using her powers to make him float. Seeing the purple eyes, he'd assumed she was one of Zascare's goons, as she demanded to know where he got the Omnitrick. Ben tells her Zascare is gone, even if she's one of his goons, she ain't getting the watch, and transforms as we get the Heat Blast vs. Xylene fight, playing out as in the show, with her tearing apart the playground and using it as projectiles, and Ben using his fire to burn them all into ash before they could hit him. We get a slight change here when she uses the water from the fire hydrant to put out Heat Blast flames. He then hits the Omnitrix symbol and changes into what he'd now called Lycanthrawler, better known as Benwolf in the original series. Seemed he'd taken Charmcaster's advice about the name. Anyway, the alien woman gets confused, seeing him switch forms so quickly as she tries to attack again. But Ben unleashed a sonic howl that knocked her back into one of the nearby trees, and Max points a large blaster telling them to back away from his grandson. The woman, recognizing Max's voice, turns to him as Max seems happy to see her, calling her Xylene, and asking what she was doing there exactly. And the two start to catch up, confusing Ben and the others as he timed himself out, changing back into human form. We see that they'd been chatting for quite a while as it was now starting to get dark outside, and Gwen asks how Max and Xylene knew each other, with Max telling them that they go way back to his plumber days, with her adding that he used to be quite the looker back then. Ben just gives them a funny look as she goes on to explain that the girls used to fawn over him, but Max only ever had eyes for one girl in particular. But still, they'd become good friends from their years of working together, telling Ben he's inherited his grandfather's good looks, as Gwen looks annoyed at that. Quickly changing the subject, Charmcaster then asks if this was a social visit or if she'd come here for a reason, to which Xylene tells them that she was transporting the Omnitrix when she was attacked, explaining to them that she'd sent it to the planet below for safety and it was meant for Max, though Max says Ben's better at it than he could have been, stating it was meant for him. There is no flashback of Xylene and Max together, instead cutting straight to the robot drone appearing and attacking. Because the two never went off on their own, this means all 5 of them are there ready to fight the drone. Ben fights the drone as forearms like in the show, while Xylene and Charmcaster break the ground under the robot, taking it off balance, with Max blasting it in the side with the device he'd pointed at Xylene earlier. Gwen helped with a binding spell that made the robot's tendrils wrap around itself as it falls over. With the robot down, Ben and Xylene start trying to rip it apart, though it gets its tendrils free as this happens and begins taking bits and pieces from the rust bucket and tries to attack again, though Forearms had grabbed it by the tendrils. He's then shot in the face by the drone, knocking him back as the remains of the rust bucket are blown to bits. Switching to Diamond Head, Ben then uses his crystals to stab through the drone as a sparking wire hit the punctured propane tank, making it explode and topple over. He then begins to rip it apart in anger as it had pointed its blaster at Max, Gwen, and the others. They do not simply put the rust bucket back together here, as it sadly was in too many pieces. Rather, they grab what they could of it and begin to head out to a garage where Max says he's got something that could help. This is where we get the second rust bucket's first appearance. It was larger than the original, and on the inside there was more space, with Max asking the man there if he could give it the fixings with the remains of the first rust bucket while showing his plumber's badge to the man. With a nod, they then begin to do just that, and we get them having it tagged and with plates and the such, though it took a while for them to do so. and we later on get what was left of the drone starting to rebuild itself at the docks with them fighting it once more. Xylene does not unlock Upchuck, however, and instead we get Ben going gray matter and asking Charmcaster to get him to an entry point where he could climb inside. Doing so, Gray Matter then crawls into the robot, unhooking systems as he'd made his way to the main core and began to detach it from the drone, along with doing the same for the backup system, with Xylene then ripping it apart once it was down, and Ben changes back to normal, stating, "No power, no threat, backup taken out too," to which Xylene tells him, "Impressive." The final scene is Xylene telling Ben to take care of the Omnitrix, as Vilgax isn't the only one that was after it, before getting onto his ship and leaving.